Hey folks, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today I'm going to review another Vaesen horror adventure, A Dance of Death. Like all Vaesen adventures, A Dance of Death is a tale of Nordic horror. The investigators must visit a distant farm village where one of the owners has a problem. A farm girl has mysteriously awakened near a lake with no memory of how she got there, and this was soon followed by the drowning of several cows. Soon, the investigators are going to get pulled into an unsettling tale of dark romanticism, unrequited love, and old magic, with a very powerful nemesis at the center of this adventure that they'll eventually have to confront. So, does A Dance of Death deserve time at your table? Well, get ready for some spoilers, because not only am I going to give you a full review of A Dance of Death, but I'm also going to give you game masters some tips and tricks on how to run it like a pro. Here we go. A Dance of Death is written by Gabrielle de Bourges, and you can find it in Seasons of Mystery, a Vaesen supplement that features 4 unconnected adventures, each one themed around a certain time of year. This one takes place in springtime, but the season doesn't really play into it that much. The adventure is 24 pages long, and because there's only a handful of locations and NPCs, you can likely get it done in one session. When I ran this for 4 players, I finished it in about 3 hours. Like most Vaesen adventures, A Dance of Death kicks off with the players receiving a letter from someone who has had an unusual experience and needs their help. Swarj Jenny, the owner of a small northern farm, is worried that her farm is being threatened by something unnatural. Here, let's take a listen to her letter.
To whom it may concern. My name is Jenny, and I turn to your society, for I know not what else to do. I am but the humble owner of Swarj farm, situated in Nusnäs in Mora parish. It all started one morning when Pers Ida, a kulla working at the fäbodvall in Fudal, woke up on the shore of Lake Siljan with no recollection of how she got there. She had gone to bed with the other farm girls as usual. The whole thing was very strange, and several of the girls have been worried ever since. I write to you now in the wake of 2 of my cows drowning in the lake, despite the fence that was supposed to contain them. Someone or something led them there. I am convinced that something unnatural is at work, and that it is coming for us. Having no one else to help me, I sincerely hope that this letter reaches you, and that you will find it in your hearts to offer your assistance and expertise. Yours humbly, Swarj Jenny.
So, Jenny needs the players' help because one of her farm girls, Pers Ida, lost her memory and almost drowned near a lake, and 2 cows did drown. This is a pretty low-key introduction to a Vaesen mystery, since there's nothing clearly supernatural going on, like maybe Pers Ida just sleepwalked. But obviously we know that that's not true. Now, before I get into what happens when the players arrive at Jenny's farm, I want to talk about the main adversary in this adventure. The Vaesen who's at the center of this story is the Neck, a scraggly-haired, 3-eyed spirit who lives in the water. His magic is all about music, and he can play his instrument so well that he can effectively mind control people and lead them to dark fates, like forcing people to dance until they wear out and die, or luring them into the water where they drown. The Neck can also shapeshift into men and animals and use his trollcraft to create illusions and confuse his opponents. He can also easily move from waterway to waterway all throughout the land. Now, I'm going to really emphasize this up front. You, as a GM, have to think about the Neck as this legendary bad guy who operates at the same level as Dracula or Freddy Krueger. He's ancient, unique, and incredibly formidable. And much like those famous villains, the Neck can only really be defeated in a few very specific ways. My point is this, is that if you as a GM treat the Neck as some random goblin-y, mischievous creature, you're doing a huge injustice to this entire adventure. I'm emphasizing this because I think the adventure doesn't emphasize it enough. And because the neck will operate mostly behind the scenes of much of this adventure, he can come across as kind of underwhelming if you just kind of run this adventure straight out of the book. If you and your players respect the neck, this adventure is going to go much better. Okay, so now we know that the neck is behind the mysterious drownings that are going to lure the players to the farms. Well, he sort of is. Let's talk a little bit about what happened before the players got involved. The neck loves music, and he was summoned to this farmland when he heard the songs and revelry of the springtime festivals. The neck appears in Lake Siljan, and he plans to do what he always does, which is, I guess, cruelly lure people to the lake to drown them. But instead, he falls hopelessly in love with a local farm girl named Elizabeth Bull. And she was so enchanted by his music that she fell in love with him and promised to bring him more human sacrifices. Now, in one of the adventure's greatest gaps, it doesn't actually say why the neck needs more human sacrifices and why Elizabeth is so willing to help him with, well, murder. While I think it's okay for some stories to leave the motivations of folkloric bad guys a little vague and mysterious, this motivation is so critical to this adventure that you just can't leave it empty here. So I'm going to say, and you should just steal this, that the neck is legitimately in love with Elizabeth, and he believes that by sacrificing enough humans, he can channel powerful magic to allow Elizabeth to live underwater with him forever without drowning. This adds a touch of dark romanticism to this adventure and makes the whole plot make way more sense. Meanwhile, another local poor fiddler, his name's Gustav, he's also in love with Elizabeth, but he's dismayed when he figures out that she's clearly in love with another skilled musician. He doesn't know it's the neck, he just thinks it's somebody else like who's really good with music. So competitive Gustav concocts a plan to win Elizabeth's heart by becoming the best fiddler in the land. Now, Gustav must know something about local legends in the area because he suspects that the neck is living nearby. And in accordance with the lore, he steals a black cat from the farm girls, goes to Lake Siljan, sacrifices the cat to the neck, which forces the neck to teach him how to play his fiddle supernaturally good. The neck agrees, but makes Gustav swear that he'll also bring him human sacrifices. And being a good boyfriend, the neck tells Elizabeth about this deal, and she's like, cool, great, so I guess I don't have to do it. And so she goes along with this plan to kind of like help Gustav sacrifice people to the neck, so remember, so she can live underwater with him forever. As an experienced investigator, I feel like I should say this whole plan sounds very complicated. So now that Gustav owes some sacrifices to the neck, he uses his newly acquired hypnotic musical tunes to lure an innocent farm girl, Persida, to the lake to drown her. But then he realizes what he's doing is just downright evil, so he chickens out and gives up. And this is why Persida awakens near the lake, confused how she got there. Now Gustav realizes that he's in way over his head, having done a bargain with the neck, and now he's getting desperate. To stall a little bit, he drowns some cows in the lake, promising the neck some more human sacrifices later. And then he comes up with a plan to stop the neck, steal the neck's fiddle, and use it to convince Elizabeth to just run away entirely with him away from this area. So what's interesting about this adventure is that you actually have three villains. The neck himself, his loyal girl Elizabeth, who's willing to help him with his dark deeds. And then you have Gustav, who made a deal with the devil but kind of regrets it, but is in too deep to really know how to get out. And if the players don't figure all of this out soon and stop the neck and his accidental minions, like more and more innocent people on the farms are going to die. The adventure is not laid out in the best way, so there's a lot of this information I just explained, just kind of spread out in different ways. So it's difficult to understand how the players are going to get all the clues that they need to solve this mystery. But let me walk through how my players solved it and what I think is the likeliest series of events. Shortly after arriving at the farm, the players meet Swaraj Jenny, the woman who wrote them the letter. and she'll welcome them to the small little cabin village. Jenny tells them that tonight is Elizabeth Bowles' birthday. Remember, she's the girl that's in love with the neck. And Jenny invites them to the celebration planned for that evening. Now, like a lot of Vaesen adventures, it's important that the PCs establish trust with the locals before they'll get any interesting information. Elizabeth won't be too interested in talking to the players on her birthday night, but Perseida, the girl who almost drowned, will be willing to chat. She can tell them the exact spot where she almost drowned near the lake, and how she's so confused how she got there, and how she suspects that something unnatural happened to her. The PCs will also get a chance to talk to Gustav, the fiddler. The PCs will see him slip a love letter to Elizabeth Bowles, but when she seems uninterested in him, he'll eventually get drunk and he'll bully the PCs a bit. This does a good job setting him up right away as the adventure's likeliest villain. Gustav's under a lot of pressure and he's scared that the PCs are onto him. So eventually he'll sulk away and he'll decide to lure one of the PCs to the lake, thinking that, well, maybe killing a complete stranger is okay. And so one of the PCs will awaken in the middle of the night to be lured out into the forest and almost killed. This music sounds so beautiful. By the way, the adventure briefly mentions that there are bears in the forest, so I introduced a giant bear here to terrorize the players in the woods as they try to rescue their musically charmed friend. This made the rescue a little harder and gave something for those tough, gun-wielding PCs to do. Later on, I actually decided that that was the Neck himself, who can take the form of various animals. I did this little addition just to kind of help the adventure along a little bit. Okay, so after one of the PCs is charmed and almost killed, they'll inevitably go check out the lake. Now, one of the challenges with this adventure is that all the horror and tension comes from the Neck, messing with the players with his powers. So as a GM, you have to know where and when to use these, and I recommend that you antagonize your players right away, as soon as the PCs go and check out the lake. That's when the Neck will notice that they're snooping around. The adventure gives some fun options to increase the paranoia here, maybe the investigators hear unearthly music coming from the lake, or see a hunched fiddler in the fog, or have something outright weird happen, like seeing giant tadpoles in the lake, only to have one of them show up later in one of the PC's ale mugs. A toast to finding the Vaesen. My players were really freaked out by that one. The rest of this adventure is a straight-up procedural investigation. It plays out kind of like a cop show, with the PCs needing to assemble the full story based on the clues that they can get from 3 or 4 NPCs who can be found in just a couple locations. I'm just going to really emphasize here that this adventure is designed for role players, because almost all of the information the PCs need must be gained through conversation. There's just not a lot of exploration or sneaking around or fights for the players to deal with. Just some farm girls who have their secrets. Eventually, through these conversations, the players will get a sense that Elizabeth is in love with a fiddler who is not Gustav, and they'll start to wonder who that is, and this will eventually lead them to the Neck. And if they aren't fast enough, the GM has some tools that are provided to accelerate, like the Neck trying to drown Perseida again, or him just eventually getting tired of the whole thing and forcing Gustav to play magical music that's going to drown the whole village. The adventure recommends that these accelerations take place one night apart from each other, which means that the whole adventure should take around 3 nights, but there's just not enough material to fill up 3 days of investigation. My players had figured out 70% of this mystery before noon on the second day. So I just had to accelerate Perseida's second disappearance and the Neck's eventual plan to drown everybody all at once, Pied Piper style. I just had to kind of move it along and just keep inserting that as the players got closer and closer to figuring out the story. Eventually the players will figure out that the Neck is involved and they'll want to confront him. But to do so successfully, they need to find a way to defeat him. There are 2 real ways. First, the PCs can overwhelm him with Christian symbolism, like if he's surrounded in a circle by people bearing crosses. They can find this information if they discover a missing tapestry, which was once in the dining hall of the town, which shows a priest like banishing him like the old-fashioned way. I really wish there was a handout for this, by the way, but you can find my version in the links below. There's enough crucifixes in the village to pull this off, but I said that the PCs will also need 1 or 2 additional NPCs to truly form the circle, kind of requiring them to like make friends and persuade some NPCs to help if they decide to go that route. The next way to defeat the neck is to find a knife, cut a fiddle's strings with it, and stab it into the ground near the neck. This stops all the neck's magic from working, and he can be chased away. The PCs can discover this trick in an unfinished letter found in Gustav's cabin. One of the changes I made to this is I said the knife had to be pretty close to the neck for that to work. They couldn't just see him from like 100 yards off and do that. They had to kind of get close to him and take some risk. But armed with one of these 2 methods, the PCs are going to eventually march to the neck and confront the neck at the lake. And this confrontation is a lot more interesting, by the way, if you can kind of trigger the next final plan, like drowning everybody in the village with music. So when I ran this adventure, just as the PCs figured this out and were forming their plan to take on the neck, they heard that mesmerizing fiddle music start up and witness all the men and women of the farm villages just strangely marching towards the lake. This sets up a really urgent battle where the PCs have to resist the music themselves, banish the lake, and really move fast before all their new friends die. And with the neck defeated, the PCs have won the day and the adventure's over. As you can tell, this is a pretty straightforward mystery. All it really takes to solving it is talking to a couple of the NPCs or following them around for a little bit to figure out what's going on. So let's talk about what I liked about this adventure and what I didn't. I liked the fact that the Vaesen isn't the only villain of this adventure, and that Gustav and Lisbeth are kind of awful people who are just over their heads. And this twist of having like multiple villains really kept my players guessing to who was really behind all these mysterious events right up until the very end of the adventure. I also like that the neck is really powerful, even though the adventure doesn't really emphasize that, and that the PCs have to prepare really well to have any chance of defeating him. And that kind of setup where the PCs can easily be overwhelmed if they're not careful is just great for a horror adventure. Now that said, I think this adventure as written has some problems. Now they can be fixed, and I'll explain in a second how I did it, but I think ultimately you as a GM have to be comfortable with a lot of improvisation and kind of role-playing for this adventure to work. The first problem is that the adventure misses a huge opportunity with the neck as it's written. Like I said in the intro, this guy is really powerful. Like he's literally on par with Dracula in terms of his powers and abilities. He can hypnotize people, shapeshift into people and animals, disappear from one place to another, and only be stopped in some very specific ways. You just can't wheel this kind of villain out in the final act and expect your players to deal with him. This adventure becomes way more interesting if you reveal to the players very early on that the neck is involved and what that means. So I'm going to suggest a big change to the adventure. After one of the PCs is almost killed by being lured into the forest by magical music, the PCs should absolutely realize that they're dealing with the neck. I think this is fair, by the way, since the neck is such a unique villain. Once someone's mind controlled with a fiddle, they'll likely know what's going on. It's a bit like waking up with fang marks on your neck, like you know it's a vampire. So this should be pretty obvious too. Now, how do you introduce the neck to your players? I guess you could allow a knowledge roll to give the players that information, but instead I used the NPCs that are there. I said that Swar's Jenny suspected that it was the neck once Ida woke up near the lake, but she didn't include that bit of information in her letter because she wasn't sure. Otherwise, why would she write this secret society of paranormal investigators a letter about a couple of drowned cows? And maybe some of the other villagers know about the neck. I mean, clearly Gustav did because he went to look for them. So once this happens and the PCs realize what's going on, it's very easy to just tell them guys, you're dealing with the neck and you're in a lot of trouble. Now, once the PCs know that the neck's around, the adventure just gets way more tense and interesting. The level of paranoia goes way up. mind control is a really scary power, and because the neck can shapeshift into humans, suddenly everybody in town is a suspect. The adventure underuses this last ability too. Yeah, it mentions that the neck can appear as a hooded musician named Nicholas, but the adventure doesn't really say how or when to use this. And so I ended up not using Nicholas in the adventure, which I think was a mistake. And if I were to run Dance of Death again, I'd actually have Nicholas show up soon after the PCs start talking openly about the neck. Because now that they know about him, the neck wants to know about them, and he can show up to try to get information on them. Your players may even suspect that they're talking to the neck when Nicholas shows up, but that's fine. The neck's overconfident. He doesn't really think they can stop him, and the PCs are probably going to be unprepared at that point anyway, so it can make for a really intimidating encounter when they realize they're being questioned by this guy who's obviously the neck. The next problem that I have with the adventure is because so much of it happens through conversations, which relies on NPCs, you really need one or two more NPCs to play with. Because there's really only 4 NPCs in the adventure to use as provided. You have Swarge Jenny, who clearly doesn't know much because she's the one that wrote the PCs the letter. And then you have the 2 culprits, Lisbeth and Gustav. And then you have 1 or 2 other farm girls who have a little bit of information each. But if something happens to one of those NPCs, you as a GM quickly run out of tools. Fortunately, the adventure briefly mentions 2 brothers, Costa and Tamas, who I fleshed out a little bit. I played them both as these awkward, unfriendly, and highly suspicious local farmers who are very protective of the girls. Their unfriendliness up front just added a couple more suspects at the beginning of the adventure, but if the PCs bothered to win them over, then they could be super useful and they could help find supplies, they could dig up local lore on the neck and help search buildings or just keep an eye out on the girls. And if the PCs bullied these 2 brothers or just randomly did stuff that was uncouth, like smashing into people's houses, well, those brothers were there to stop that kind of behavior, so they could actually make antagonists if I needed them. When I ran this adventure, my players initially just hated Tomas because he was rude and always spying on them and acting really creepy, but they slowly won Tomas' trust. And by the end of the adventure, Tomas was their buddy. And this felt like a win to everybody until me as a GM realized that I had this NPC that I could endanger that would really hurt the players if something happened to him, and it was great. He's our best friend! Yeah, Tomas drowned. The players forced to choose between saving him or one of their own. Poor Tomas. That was awesome. So that's a Dance of Death. So what do I think? I think it's got such a good premise, but it really needs an experienced GM to run it. There's just a lot of GM role-playing and quick thinking needed to run a mystery that revolves only around a handful of NPCs. And a Dance of Death won't feel like a horror adventure unless the GM has a really good sense of pacing and improvisation to kind of insert that weirdness where it's most appropriate. And it needs a group filled with cooperative role players who don't mind that this adventure is so constrained. Because it'll probably have your players traveling in a pack, interrogating one witness at a time. One alpha player with good social skills on his character sheet could easily dominate this adventure and ruin the fun for others. So just know your group before you choose to run this one. Now, while I'm hesitating to recommend a Dance of Death outright, I will say that I think it's a great choice for a small group of players. Maybe even one-on-one, 1 player and 1 GM. For example, if you enjoy playing RPGs with your significant other, this adventure really works. The fact that one investigator can solve the whole adventure and the focus is really on role-playing means that this entire thing is this sort of intimate, moody affair that would work for 2 players. Now, I didn't run it like this. I ran it with 4 players, but if you do, let me know in the comments below how that went. Oh, and if you're going to run this adventure on Virtual Tabletop, be sure to check out the assets that I created for A Dance of Death from the link in the description below. There's maps and bonus tokens and even that professionally voiced letter from Swarge Jenny. Also, if you want to avoid being lured into a lake deep in the night by an evil but romantic spirit, don't forget to click those like and subscribe buttons. the next subscribes to me, so should you. Until next time, I'm JC. And just remember, oh, that music's so beautiful. I'll be right back.